In the summer of 1973, the quiet logging community of Gray Elk, Oregon was unsettled by the disappearance of twin girls Lily and Ava Whitmore. They had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a berry-stained basket deep in the forest. The sisters had been 6 years old, identical in appearance, but distinct in temperament. Lily was louder, quicker to cry, quicker to laugh. Ava, quieter, more careful, more often trailing just a step behind. It was late morning when Beth Whitmore last saw them. The cabin sat at the edge of a dense pine ridge, its windows clouded with dust, its porch split down the middle by a hairline crack. Beth was kneading dough, her hands floured, her mind elsewhere. The girls asked if they could pick blackberries. She hesitated, then nodded. "Just don't cross the creek," she said. They never came back. An hour passed, then 2. The sun climbed higher. When Beth stepped outside, the silence felt wrong, thick and pressing. Their pail lay by the fire pit overturned. A smear of juice stained the wooden rim. By the time local deputies arrived, the shadows had grown long. Dogs were brought in. Men in flannel combed the brush, but the forest swallowed sound and memory in equal measure. Tracks near the eastern edge led nowhere, just impressions in the moss fading quickly. No signs of struggle, no screams heard. Only a truck, a dull green one, Beth said, parked just off the road around 11 a.m. She didn't see the driver's face, only a cigarette glinting in the side mirror, then vanishing behind the trees. That night, the rain came down in sheets. 3 days later, a search team found a small picnic basket wedged in the roots of an alder. The cloth was gone, so were the berries. The soil nearby was disturbed, as if something had been dragged or buried, but nothing lay beneath. The forest went still again. 9 years passed, and then, in the early autumn of 1982, a hiker named Joel Marks, looking for mushrooms near a long-abandoned logging road, knelt beside a hollowed log. Something pale caught his eye. A doll, damp with moss. Its dress handmade from fabric aged but familiar, and stitched inside the hem in tiny uneven thread, the letter L. Joel turned it over. The base was wood, smooth, and nearly hidden beneath dirt and time, a single letter carved by hand. A B. In the days to come, that small, quiet letter would unravel the very fabric of Beth Whitmore's life and lead to the most horrifying revelation imaginable. The morning the twins vanished, Beth remembered something else. Something she hadn't told the police right away. A truck. It had been parked just beyond the bend near the trailhead, partially hidden behind a stand of young fir trees. Dull green, she said, with rust eating away at one fender. The passenger side mirror had a crack that fractured light into spider webs. She hadn't seen the driver's face, just the cherry of a cigarette pulsing. Then, nothing. When she looked again an hour later, the truck was gone. It became a rumor before it became evidence. A man in the woods, a hunter maybe. Out-of-town plates according to a boy on a dirt bike who swore he'd seen it the night before, but no license number, no make or model confirmed. Just a truck and a woman's memory fragmented by panic. The investigators followed that lead for days. Roadblocks were set up. Campers questioned. No one stepped forward. Nothing was found. The forest kept its silence. Beth's recollection grew more uncertain with each retelling. At first, she thought it had a red cooler in the back. Then, maybe a tarp. The details shifted slightly, but enough to matter. The deputies marked it down as anecdotal, a possible distraction. Still, the image lingered, not just in Beth's mind, but in the town's. People began to talk. About drifters, about men who crossed state lines with rifles and cold eyes. About the way the woods sometimes swallowed people whole. Then came the sighting a week after the search was scaled back. A man matching the vague description was seen in a bait shop 2 counties over asking about deer season. He paid cash, drove off in a vehicle no one could quite agree on. Brown or green, rusted maybe blue. The owner remembered the man's hands scarred, missing a fingernail. Nothing more. Years passed. The lead cooled. The truck, if it had ever existed, dissolved into myth. But Beth never forgot that moment. The quiet puff of smoke behind the mirror. The vague shape of someone watching, waiting. Later, after the doll was found, the memory returned with new weight. She mentioned it again to a new investigator, younger, sharper. He pressed her for detail. She faltered. And when he asked how she could be so sure it was a hunter, Beth paused. He had something in the back, something long, like a rifle. But rifles were common here. Everyone owned one. And no one could explain why in a town where everyone knew everyone, no one recognized that truck. The first family member to arrive after the twins disappeared was Greg Alton, Beth's younger brother. He drove up from Bend the same night, the tires of his truck spitting gravel as he pulled into the clearing. His shirt was stained with oil. His eyes already bloodshot, though he claimed he hadn't been drinking. Greg had always been a difficult man. Volatile, loud, quick to anger, quicker to accuse. As a boy, he'd once broken another student's nose for calling Beth a liar. As a man, he was harder to read, his loyalty twisting in ways that didn't always make sense. Still, Beth clung to him in the aftermath. Family was family after all. He joined the second search party the next morning, brought his own flashlight, wore a knife strapped to his thigh. Around dusk, he returned with news. "I saw them," he said, "down near the old creek bed." His voice was hoarse, his boots soaked. "Just for a second." They were skipping rocks. Everyone froze. The creek bed had already been searched twice. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" one deputy asked. Greg shrugged. "I thought it was a memory, from before. Then I realized it was today." The timeline didn't add up. Beth swore the girls had never gone near the water. The dogs hadn't picked up any scent past the bramble line. And yet Greg insisted. Said he'd seen the flash of blonde hair, identical pigtails. Said they waved to him. But then his story shifted. The next day, he said they hadn't waved at all. They just looked at me, like they were waiting for someone. And later still, maybe it wasn't today. Maybe it was yesterday. The inconsistencies piled up. Greg grew combative. Accused the deputies of blaming the family to cover their own incompetence. At one point, he punched a wall in the station, left a hairline fracture in the plaster. Still, there was no physical evidence tying him to the disappearance. His alibi, working on a carburetor for a neighbor's truck, checked out barely, but the doubt lingered. Even years later, locals whispered about Greg, about his temper, about the way he always seemed to circle back to that creek bed as if drawn to it. One officer noted something strange in his report. Greg referred to the twins in the past tense, even before the search was officially called off. "I loved them," Greg had said. "They were good kids." A slip. Or something darker. Tucked between the pines 3 miles north of the Whitmore cabin stood a shack, low-roofed, crumbling roof patched with old metal signage. It belonged to a man named Marvin Clay. He was a known figure in Gray Elk, though rarely seen. Released from state prison in 1971, Clay kept to himself, lived without electricity, and bathed in rainwater. His crime assault with a deadly weapon had landed him 8 years inside. No one knew the details, only that he came back changed. Quieter. Less inclined to drink, more inclined to vanish when seen. After the twins disappeared, a deputy named Halbrook suggested they pay Clay a visit. He'd lived within walking distance, knew the forest better than most, and importantly, had no alibi. When the sheriff's men knocked, Clay didn't answer. They entered anyway. The inside was a hoarder's crypt. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, jars with unidentifiable contents, shelves crammed with rusted tools and jars of moths. But it wasn't until they opened the trunk by his bed that the tone shifted from discomfort to alarm. Inside were dolls. Dozens. Old handmade plastic. Some missing limbs. Some with sewn mouths. At the bottom, a cloth satchel containing brittle picture books, children's titles from the 1950s, each cover worn to softness. The deputies paused, then called in a forensic sweep. No blood, no clothing traceable to the twins, no sign they'd been there at all. Still, Clay was arrested for obstruction, then released 2 days later when nothing held. He said the books had belonged to his niece, the dolls salvaged from a dump near the river. He'd kept them because they didn't deserve to rot. It was a disturbing answer, but not a criminal one. Clay moved deeper into the forest after that. His shack burned down in 1976 arson, though no one confessed. He was last seen living in a tented lean-to 15 miles north, scribbling into a spiral notebook. Then, like so many others tied to this case, he faded. But the suspicion never quite did, especially when the doll was discovered in 1982. Deputies recalled the stitched mouths, the hand-altered clothes. The news anchors called Clay the doll collector. No one asked if the carving, if the blood made sense coming from him. He became in many ways the perfect red herring, visible, threatening, and so very easy to fear. Which is why no one looked closer at those who weren't. Joseph Ames had been with the Park Service for over a decade by 1973. A calm man, polite middle-aged, with a clipped mustache and hands always brushed clean. He kept his uniform, pressed his truck spotless. He was well-liked, even trusted by many in Gray Elk. He was also the first official to reach the cabin the day after Lily and Ava vanished. Ames had walked the perimeter alone, taking notes, tagging locations for the search grid. Later in the incident file, his log included times, weather conditions, and estimated distances. Nothing unusual until someone looked again years later. The discrepancies were small, almost imperceptible, but they were there. A creek labeled dry had in fact been running that week. A path marked as impassable had no such obstacle in photos from that day. A timeline noted Beth calling in the missing report at 12:45 p.m., but the dispatch log recorded the call at 12:12. When asked, Ames said he'd adjusted the report for clarity. To clean up confusion, he claimed, and remove irrelevant noise. But in doing so, he'd erased something else, the original radius of the search. The error meant one sector, deep pine and broken terrain northeast of the cabin, was delayed in being searched for nearly 36 hours. By then, if any trail had existed, the rain had washed it away. He was formally reprimanded, but not fired. The report was amended with an asterisk, a procedural footnote, and filed away. Ames retired in 1978, moved to Arizona, died in 1981 quietly. But when the moss-covered doll was found in '82, someone pulled his original search map from archives. The hollow log, the one containing the doll, sat squarely within the delayed grid. And then a second curiosity emerged. Ames had been assigned to that exact area. His signature appeared on the searcher roster, but no record showed he ever entered it. No coordinates logged, no flag markers set. When Beth was informed of this, she didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then she whispered, "He was the one who told me not to worry, that if the girls had wandered the woods would bring them back." He'd placed a hand on her shoulder, she remembered, told her to rest. There are comforts that numb, and comforts that mislead. In retrospect, Ames had offered the latter. The Whitmore family name had always carried weight in Gray Elk landowners since the 1920s lumber and livestock. Beth was the youngest of three, raised in the cabin that now stood weather-beaten and quiet. Its roof patched with tar, its porch rail splintered at the corners. Most assumed she'd inherited the house after her parents' passing in '69. Few questioned her past, until the doll resurfaced. The hiker, Joel Marks, had handed the wooden base to a deputy. The carving one faint letter B was presumed to stand for Beth. A sad tribute, perhaps. A mother's mark. But someone in the sheriff's department, new to the file, methodical, dug deeper. They retrieved the original guest book from the funeral home where Beth's parents' memorial had been held. Most pages were simple names, condolences, until one near the middle dated May 11th, 1969. It read Bethany R for them both. Rest now. The handwriting matched the signature on Beth's 1973 missing persons statement. Bethany R, not Whitmore. The name Whitmore did not appear on her birth certificate, nor on any school records prior to 1965. Instead, they bore the surname Rule. A different town, 80 miles east. A father listed as unknown. A mother deceased. A single page from a family Bible found folded in a box of her father's effects contained only one entry with Bethany's name added in blue ink. Different handwriting, lighter, as though someone had hesitated then pressed forward anyway. The twins' birth certificates listed Beth Whitmore as their mother. No father named. But both girls had been born in a private birthing home near Coos Bay, 2 hours from Gray Elk. That clinic burned down in 1975, records lost. What surfaced instead was a yearbook photo from 1960. A teenage Bethany R, pale, thin-shouldered expression unreadable. Behind her, partially obscured, another girl a year older, taller, with the same mouth, the same eyes, uncaptioned, unacknowledged. A silent shadow on the edge of every frame. Back in Gray Elk, Beth never denied the R name when asked. She simply said, "That was a long time ago. I left it behind." But the investigators no longer saw her as a grieving mother clinging to memory. They began to see her as someone else. Someone who might not have been grieving at all, but guarding. The doll found by Joel Marks was not remarkable at first glance. Its face had no features, just faint indentations where eyes might have been. The moss that clung to its cloth skin gave it a damp, eerie weight. But what marked it was its clothing delicately sewn from what appeared to be a child's blouse. The fabric was faded pink with white daisies. Beth had given Ava that blouse on her 6th birthday. Joel had turned the doll over in his hands. That was when he'd seen it, the tiny bracelet tucked inside the back seam. Child-sized. Worn leather with 3 painted beads the color long chipped. The letters spelled L-I-L. Lily's bracelet. A gift from their neighbor hand-painted one summer afternoon. Forensics confirmed it. And confirmed something else. Traces of dried blood embedded in the cloth lining. Too old to test for DNA in 1982, but they noted the type AB negative. Uncommon. Only 1% of the population. Neither Greg nor Marvin Clay had it. Beth had said she didn't remember the girls' blood types. Investigators searched the area. The hollow log sat near a ridge that dipped into a gully, overgrown now but passable in summer. No bones were found. No clothing. Just the doll and the brittle remains of thread used to stitch the hem shut. Hand-sewn, unsteady, as though done by someone unfamiliar with the task, or by small, unskilled hands. Inside, the wood's grain etched faintly but unmistakably was the letter B. Not deep. Almost cautious. It had gone unnoticed by Joel. Missed in the first round of evidence processing. It only surfaced when a junior archivist rephotographed the item for cataloging. B for Beth, they assumed. The mother memorializing her loss. But the questions mounted: why leave it hidden so deep in the forest? Why stitch clothing only the family would recognize? Why include the bracelet if not to be found unless it wasn't meant to be found? Not then. And then the thread pulled taut. Beth had not just vanished into the background after the funeral. She had rewritten herself. From Bethany R to Beth Whitmore. From someone forgotten to someone maternal protective. Perhaps even obsessive. And someone once had known the truth. Someone who had tried quietly, carefully to speak. Not with words, but with a doll. The blood stain inside the doll's lining, small, dried, tucked where the cloth met the wood, was overlooked in 1973. By 1982, technology had advanced just enough to extract limited information. Not DNA, but type. AB negative. Rare. Statistically uncommon. The sample was cross-referenced with known individuals connected to the case. The twins had never had blood work done. Beth claimed she couldn't recall their types. They were healthy. I never needed to know. Greg was O positive. Marvin Clay, a negative. Ranger Ames had no recorded blood type on file. But when a new investigator, Elaine Moreno, joined the cold case unit in '83, she dug deeper. Moreno was methodical, patient. She built timelines from the margins, invoices, prescriptions, library cards. It was Moreno who contacted the county hospital in rural Bethany's birth town and requested their archived immunization charts. The files were brittle ink, smudged by time. But there it was in black and red: Bethany rule, AB negative. Booster reaction noted 1959, a match. Beth, the woman who had stitched that doll, hidden it where no child could find it, had left more than fabric behind. But that raised another question. If Beth had bled inside the doll when, and why, cut a slip of the needle? Or something else? something that linked her physically to the object not as a mourner, but as the maker. Moreno looked closer. The blood was not in the outer layer where an accidental prick might land, but deep inside the lining, as though placed intentionally, pressed there, sealed shut. Who puts a trace of themselves inside a memorial, unless they mean it as a signature? Another path emerged. If Beth had sewn the doll, she had done so with precise intention, using Ava's missing blouse, hiding Lily's bracelet, embedding herself in the object, creating, not commemorating. Beth, when questioned again in late '83, insisted she'd never seen the doll, claimed she hadn't sewn in years, claimed again she was never any good at it. And then offhandedly, my mother used to do all that. She was always making things, dolls mostly. She said girls needed things that looked like them. The comment was recorded, filed, forgotten, until Moreno found a second thread, an old report from 1961, from the Rule home, a welfare visit, 3 children listed, only 2 known, 1 name blacked out. Beth kept a single photo album on the shelf above her wood stove, black leather brittle at the spine. She'd offered it freely once back in the early days of the investigation, handing it to the deputy with trembling fingers. "It's all I have left of them," she had said. The pages chronicled birthdays, creekside picnics, and long winters. The twins in matching pajamas. The twins holding a snow globe. The twins beside a cake with uneven frosting. Beth appeared in some hair tucked behind her ears, always watching, rarely smiling. But one photo was different. A grainy black and white from 1963. Not of the twins, but of Beth as a child, maybe 10. In a paper party crown, arms folded, eyes hard. And behind her, barely in frame, another girl. Taller, hair longer. Her expression unreadable. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't looking at the camera at all. There was something unnatural about her posture, like she didn't belong. That photo had been scratched, literally clawed at the corners. A butter knife, perhaps. The taller girl's face had been partially gouged out, not torn in haste, but scraped slowly, deliberately. Moreno took the album and quietly ordered a scan. Under infrared, the erased figure came clearer. A 4th child. Not Beth. Not a cousin. An unknown. Cross-referencing school records yielded nothing, no matching name, no enrollment. But one slip surfaced in an old church roster from 1964. A confirmation ceremony. Bethany Rule was listed, alongside a girl named Rose Rule, age 13. A sister, 1 year older, then gone. Moreno began combing hospital discharge papers. In late 1968, the state mental hospital in Salem had released a Rose Rule, age 17, diagnosed with trauma-induced dissociation, discharged into the custody of her next of kin, Bethany. And then, nothing. No employment records, no marriage license, no death certificate. It was as though Rose had simply vanished. But the scratched-out photograph now spoke volumes. Whoever she was, Beth wanted her gone, not just from memory, but from evidence. Back in the Gray Elk archives, Moreno reviewed the early interviews. Beth had once said, "I was an only child. My parents tried for another, but it didn't take." The phrase had passed unnoticed. Didn't take. But now it sounded surgical. Precise. A quiet rewriting. And so the question sharpened if Beth had erased Rose from the pictures. What else had she erased, or more urgently, who the file came from a forgotten cabinet in the Salem Psychiatric Archive, yellowed, misfiled, wrapped in twine. Inside, clinical notes, scribbled observations, and a single intake photo. The girl in the picture had hollowed cheeks, a narrow frame, and wide staring eyes. Her name, Rose Rule. Admitted 1965. Discharged 1968. Diagnosis, trauma-linked identity regression. Note, fixation on childlike patterns. Obsessive behaviors toward infant objects, dolls, bracelets, cloth keepsakes. Episodes of silence interrupted by sudden verbal lucidity. Final line. Patient claims she had 2 baby sisters taken from her in infancy. No records found to support this. Moreno sat with the photo under a desk lamp for a long time. Rose had been real, institutionalized. released into Bethany's custody, and never seen again. If Rose had been telling the truth, and Beth had in fact taken in 2 infant girls, then the entire foundation of the Whitmore story collapsed. The girls weren't Beth's daughters. They were her sisters. Half-sisters, perhaps children of their father's second marriage, left in someone else's care, and then taken. A quiet adoption that was never legal, a theft disguised as motherhood. If Rose had come back to reclaim them, she would have been met not with understanding, but with fear, with fury, with someone who had spent 6 years crafting a new identity around the lie. A social worker's note from 1972 placed Rose in a temporary housing unit near Coos Bay, less than 10 miles from the birthing home where the twins had been born. The same home that burned down 3 years later. Neighbors remembered Rose. Said she walked the streets alone, watched children at the playground but never spoke. One woman, a laundromat attendant, said she came in with a torn bag full of baby clothes. Said they were her sisters. I thought she was confused. The date of Rose's last known appearance, June 3, 1973, 2 weeks before Lily and Ava vanished. Back in Gray Elk, Moreno reopened the forensics on the doll. The fabric matched Ava's missing blouse, but embedded in the thread, almost microscopic, was a second hair. Not from Beth, not from either twin, but a partial match to the Rule family line. The hair had been crushed into the hem, its root singed, as though someone had burned it, then sewn it in. The doll was not a tribute. It was a cry. And someone too silent to be heard had tried to tell the truth the only way she knew. Her name was Margot Inez, and for nearly 6 years she'd cleaned the Whitmore cabin every Thursday. Never spoke much, kept her eyes down, her hands moving. After the twins disappeared, she left town, quietly, no explanation. Moreno found her living in a faded apartment complex on the southern edge of Klamath Falls. Nearly 80, her memory sharp in fragments and soft in others. At first, she refused to speak. I said everything I knew back then, she murmured. But Moreno pressed gently, showed her the doll, the photo of Rose, her name, the bracelet. Margot stared for a long time. Then she nodded. I always wondered when someone would come back for this. She told the story slowly, how Beth had changed after the girls arrived, how she locked the bedroom doors at night, how she kept photo frames without pictures saying they were too bright for the walls, and how one week in early June Margot came in to find muddy boot prints by the back door, too large for the twins, too narrow for Greg. There was a girl in the kitchen, Margot said. Not one of the little ones. Taller, pale. She was just standing there, watching, didn't speak. Beth told me she was a cousin from out of state, but Margot never saw her arrive or leave. That girl had followed the twins with her eyes, she remembered. Not cruelly, not hungrily, just intently, as if memorizing them. She stared too long, said too little. The next week, Beth told her not to come. For a while, she'd said, "We need family time." When Margot returned 3 weeks later, the cabin was still. Toys untouched, beds made. No sign of the twins. Beth looked thinner, spoke less, cleaned obsessively. Margot had asked about the girls. Beth smiled. They're with someone safe, she had said. And then, as if correcting herself, they're in a better place. It sounded like grief. It might have been something else. Margot never told anyone. I wasn't sure what I saw, and no one asked. Moreno asked one last question. Did the girl say her name? Margot shook her head, then frowned. She hummed, though, the same song. Every time. A lullaby, I think, but not one for babies. Then in a whisper, it wasn't a tune of comfort. It was final. The final piece came not from a report, nor a file, but from a photograph long buried in an evidence box labeled non-evidentiary personal effects. It had once belonged to Beth, wedged between cookbooks and old tax documents. A photo of the twins as infants, asleep in a wicker cradle, each wearing a tiny fabric crown. Behind them stood Beth, but she was not smiling. Her hands rested on the cradle's edge, fingers tense, clutching. And to her left, partially blurred, was another figure, barefoot, face turned just enough to reveal the profile. Rose. It was dated July 1973. The photo's timestamp placed it 3 days before the twins vanished. When confronted with the full picture documents, photos, the blood type confirmation, Beth sat in silence for nearly 15 minutes. Moreno waited. The room hummed with the sound of an overhead fan and the faint tick of a second hand. Then Beth spoke. She came for them. Her voice was hollow, steady. She said they were hers, that he had promised them to her, that they were meant to replace the babies she lost. Beth stared down at her own hands, but they weren't hers. They were mine. I raised them. I fed them. I taught them to read. She lifted her eyes. She tried to take them that morning. I told her no. I told her to leave. There was a long pause. She didn't listen. In the silence that followed, she confessed quietly, deliberately, that she had pushed Rose, that Rose had struck her head on the stone by the creek bed, that the twins saw, that Lily began to scream. I couldn't let them go, she said. I couldn't let her undo what I'd made. Moreno asked where they were. Beth closed her eyes. They're together, deep where the water used to run. I wrapped them in the blanket they loved. I sang to them until they stopped crying. She had left the doll as a marker, a way to mourn in her own way. The carved B wasn't her name. It was what the girls called her long before they spoke clearly. B. Not mother, not sister. Something in between. Something possessive. Something claimed. They excavated the dry creek bed 6 days later. 3 sets of bones, 2 smaller. One with a fracture at the skull. One wrapped in singed cloth. One holding the leather bracelet. As they turned from the grave, Moreno looked at the forest one last time. The real journey was just beginning. In the end, that was the lesson: evil might hide behind familiar faces, but truth endures. As they moved toward the road, Moreno squeezed Margot's hand. They never even had a chance. No, Margot whispered, but now they'll never be forgotten. They stepped toward healing, toward a future they would build one day at a time.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.